API development is a whole cycle of things. It doesn't just end at you writing the code. You write your endpoint, they return 200, okay. It feels like you're done, you're not done. There is the design part to start with, where you and your team agree what the API should even look like before you start writing code. There is documentation, there is testing, there is mocking. Your front end needs fake data to build against because backend is not ready. The whole collaboration itself, your backend, your front end, your QA, everybody needs to be on the same page when it comes to API development. But all of these things, design, mocking, testing, collaboration, they live in different places. Your spec is in one file, your requests are in one tool, your docs are on some wiki, your mock is some package, everything is everywhere. And I think I found the perfect solution for it. APIDog is this tool that just brings everything together. Think of Postman and Swagger and your mock server and your doc site and this and that all in one single software. You design your API there, you test it there, you mock it there, your documentation generates itself there. And because it's just one place, it's a really good avenue for teams. Everyone is in sync. What you design is what you're testing, is also what is in the documentation. So in this video, we're going to set up APIDog from scratch, and we're going to walk through the process of using this software together. So first things first, we head to APIDog website. You have two options here. You can download the app. It's here for Mac, Windows, Linux, or you can launch in your web app. I'm going to be downloading on my hand. Very normal install, nothing special. And just to show you the alternative, we also launch it in the web app as well. It's basically the same thing, same interface. If you have a work laptop where you don't want to install things, or you just like living in your browser, the web app is right here. I'm going to continue with Google. So you see the onboarding question. What features of APIDog would you like to use? I'm just gonna pick everything year, and year. So this list is basically just a pitch of the tool. And none of the article. Continue. I pick my role, full stack developer, continue. And by the way, you can just practically skip this whole step. There's a skip button there. You don't have to answer the questions if you are in a hurry. But if you do answer the question, it helps tailor the workspace to how you work. And yeah, the last step, here you go, start working with APIs. You can create a blank project. They give you this pet store sample project. Now you also have the option to import an open API spec or import like a Postman collection from somewhere. So if you already have like your old API business set up somewhere, you don't have to start from zero. You can just import it from there. But yeah, for the sake of this video, let us create a blank project. And I'm going to title it Book Club API. If you've been following my API series, you will know that we've been using like this bookstore example, but today we're just going to use a book club. Same. We create that project, and now we are in. Allow. So this is APIDog. This is the interface. Before we build anything, let's just take a walk around. First thing, you notice that the layout is very familiar. You have your toolbar, your sidebar, the panel with the project tree, and like this big working area in the middle. If you used any modern dev tool, you can already guess your way around. At the very top, here is our project name. If you have other projects, it's probably going to list it out there for you. And then we have the main navigation. There are like 4 major places here. API, which is like the big one. Here you design your endpoints, you design your schema, sending requests. All of that happens here. And then we have tests, right? Your test scenarios and your test reports. We're coming back here. And then we have published documentation. This is where documentation gets published and shared. Also coming back to this place, history is pretty much like, it's just like a record of every request you've sent. So you can go back and resend, and there's the setting for the project and your invite button. This is how you bring in your team member. So you can invite your front-end person or your QA or whatever. And then we have all of our tree here. You can see endpoints, schema, components, quick requests. You can create a new WebSocket endpoint or HTTP endpoint, socket IO, even MCP if you're playing with AI agent. We can create new schema, new folder, new module, new everything. If I click imports, you will see a whole list of options. Open API, Swagger, Postman, Insomnia, all of it. So basically, the point is that if your API live already exists anywhere else, it's very easy to move it into APIDog. One more thing I wanted us to note here is also the environment selector here. We have the development environment, testing, production environment. We have this local mock, cloud mock, self-hosted mock. So you give each environment here a base URL, and APIDog just builds the full URL by itself when you send requests. So there's no need for all those double curly braces, URL gymnastic. Now, our bookstore needs its first endpoint, our book club or bookstore, whatever. And the first endpoint is adding books. So let's create the first HTTP endpoint. Our project is still pretty much empty. So the endpoint out here would open with like 3 tabs. You see we have request, design, preview. Request is for firing a request for at something like a classic API client, and preview is the documentation view of your endpoint. But we are designing first. That's the whole idea today. So we go to design first. This is the design view, and we would fill it in from top to bottom. Of course, the method defaults to get, but I'm going to change it to post. I like all of these color codes. It makes things easy to work with. And now we have the paths / books. You don't need domain or anything. This environment paths is what will provide the URL later. There's this description box here, writing what the endpoint does. What does this endpoint do? It adds a book, and this box actually supports like Markdown. So on a real project, you can properly document behavior here, edge cases, notes for your team, and all of that. And you see this little status thing up here developing. The endpoints have a life cycle in this tool, and I really love that. So you get to see if it's developing or it's testing or it's released. Your team can see the state of every endpoint at a glance. Again, collaboration. Now the request body. What does someone send to us to add a book? I will just pick JSON here. And now I get this data schema panel. Let's add in our first field. First field is title, defaults to string. You can also add a description to title, like you can say title of the book, right? I'll add another node. Next field is author, which is also a string. Let me add a description. Let me add description to this stuff. The title of the book. This is the title of the book. And this is the author of the book. And we have the asterisk here, which says it's required. If that field is not required, you just turn this off. But in our case, it is required. Let's add one more stuff. Let's say the year. And in this case, we don't want it to be a string. We want it to be an integer. And this is the year it was published. And that's our request body straight up. And moving on to responses, we already have like a 200 success default here. If we build up the response body, we can do the same and be like, the first one is ID. The ID should be an integer. And then we have title, that should be a string. We have author, that is also a string. We have year, that is an integer. And let's have created art underscore hat, which is the timestamp of when the book was added. And we can add an example response here. If I click this, I can just simply auto-generate. If I auto-generate, I have this. It builds the example response straight from the schema that we had just defined. So I don't necessarily have to type an example JSON by hand from scratch. It can take the source from the design that we had dictated, and everything can just come from there. If you want a control example, you can clear the editor. In our case, we can just change the book title. Let's change this to Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. So we change the year to some 1976 or 1988 or whatever. I click OK here, and let us save this. Name of endpoint is add book, and we save. And that's it. That is what we have designed. So I have this designed and documented, and we haven't written a single line of code yet. You can preview it here. Look at that. There is no backend yet. Nothing is deployed yet. Our API only exists as a design. But let me try to like mock it. Okay, you cannot have the local mock in the web app. This must have finished downloading. So we'll use this we'll get the app here. Okay, so app is installed, and we can move from the web app. So here on the web app, we can actually do like a local mock. On the app. Then I'm back at my endpoint, and I click request. This time I go to the request tab. And if you notice, the address, the URL bar now shows like the full local mock address. And we have the request body is kind of pre-filled from the design. We didn't have to do that. It just takes it from the design. And if I try to test this and I click send, look at that. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was just design, and I do have a response here, an actual response. And this is the sweet part. If you notice, this is not like some gibberish. The title does actually have something that reads like a book title. Fail afraid onto, but it does read like a book title. And the author does read like someone's name. And this is like the smart mock thing that APIDog has working behind the scene. It reads your field name and your types, and then it generates data that makes sense with zero configuration. I didn't set up anything. So again, this really, really supports so much of parallel working. You can just design your API. You don't have to build everything out. but everyone can work in parallel. Amount of hours that die between backend and frontend, backend is not ready, frontend is blocked. It is so, that back and forth is so unnecessary. And working in parallel like this, just everyone is moving at the same time. For teams, this is like a 10/10 feature for me. Let me try to see if I can get the mock to return something different. So you can like set up a new mock here. Let's try to, let me copy this, and let's see. Let me add this mock as an expectation here. And I say, I'm trying to return something wrong or send something wrong. Let me make it such that the year is a string instead of 2026, instead of an integer, the way it's supposed to be. Intentional bug. So if I go back to request again and I try to send, look at, this is what validation does. It tells me now that the response data differs from my endpoint specification. Year should be integer. We should have created at property. So it tells you the exact field. It expected an integer, it got a string. In real life, these are the kind of bug that would take you some time to like discover sometimes. But yeah, you can just catch it once it exists. So let's go back and delete this mock data that we set, and we'll go back to request. And of course, you can set up your real testing flow. You come to test here, create a new test scenario. Let's call this the book flow, or let's call it the add book flow, and create this scenario. And then we add a step. You can import from your endpoint. We import from our endpoint here and add it. Make sure your environment is still set to local mock. Click this. Let's try to add kite runner, Khalid Hosseini. How is that spelled? And let's say this is 2007. I'm not sure about that. But let's try to run our tests. We see you get an actual test report, pass, fail, duration, the response time, the average response time. And if something fails, you get the failing listed here with the status code, so you know exactly where to look at. And you see the CI/CD here. You can have this scenario run in your pipeline, GitHub Action, GitLab, Jenkins. You kind of run the test on every push automatically. So you can set that up as well. And my favorite part of everything is the documentation. You have quick share where you can share documentation temporarily with a teammate with maybe a quick link. And you have the published doc site, which is the real published documentation going full on site. And if you look at this page, our doc site already exists. It's just not published. You can set the site title. Let's set, okay, this makes sense. You can set a site icon. APIDog provides you a domain. You can use a custom domain. You can set up some appearances for your documentation site. So you can pretty much just publish your documentation right now. And that's pretty much it. If I go here, go to the documentation link, look at that. It's live. This is live. It's public. You can see our endpoint, all the information, all those little descriptions we typed in, they're here. So while we were actually busy designing or writing any documentation, the documentation is writing itself already, and it's interactive. This is another thing I love about this. You can send requests from right inside the documentation page. Instead of making it public, you can share with your team instead. And because the documentation is generated from the design, it updates when the design updates. So the documentation cannot, if you're using APIDog, realistically fall behind. So what APIDog is really doing is covering the full API, the full cycle of API development at every single point. There is something set up. At the design stage, you have the visual editor, you have the schemas, you have reusable components. At the development stage, you have the mock server, and it can even generate client code and requests from your spec. At the testing stage, you have the scenarios, you have automatic validation, you have reports, you have CI integration. And the documentation, that one is a 10/10 for me. You are designing and there is already documentation being like wired underground for you. At the end of it, you can just have your own published documentation site with its own domain. And that documentation site updates automatically. That idea of having just one single source of truth. You change your design, the request updates, the test sync, the documentation updates. Everyone can sync in the project the same way, right? Backend does not have to be doing one thing, while frontend is doing like another thing. Everyone is using one single source of truth. And when it comes to affordability, APIDog is actually very affordable. I know Postman changed their plans this year. Their free plan is now single user, I think. So teams that were collaborating for free cannot do that anymore. APIDog's free plan covers a pretty small team. So instead of like paying out of your nose plus maintaining all this setup everywhere, you can get the whole thing in one place. And for a small team, you can still get it for free. If you're a student, you're doing your side project, you have a small startup team, Personally, I think it's a game changer. It's a 10 over 10 for me, and I would absolutely recommend it to anyone building APIs at whatever point of the life cycle that you are. So yeah, that's that about APIDog for today. If you want to try it out, the link is in the description box below. You can download the app or just launch the web app and use it from there. And I will be continuing my API series on this channel. So if you've not subscribed, what are you waiting for? See you guys in my next video. Bye.